Hey everyone, I'm Halfway Vinny, and in this video, we're going to be talking about what I found to be the best settings for streaming on Glimesh and ensuring you have a hiccup-free stream. Now, for this, we're assuming that you already have created your channel and have your stream key ready. So, we're going to go ahead to find your stream key. You're going to go to the top right after you're logged in and click right next to your name and icon in the drop down here. We're going to go ahead and head over to settings. And in settings, we're going to go to channel settings. Now, in channel settings, you can see here blurred out that you have a stream key. So we're going to go ahead and click to copy. And from there, we're going to open up our OBS. So I already happen to have my OBS open. And for this to work, you're going to want the true OBS, Open Broadcast Software. You're not going to want Streamlabs OBS or Stream Elements OBS because currently they don't support streaming to Glimesh. Now, with the latest version of OBS, right, you're going to open it up. I already have it up here. Cool. Let's just minimize a little bit so we don't see that double. And we're going to go ahead into settings. Now, in settings here, we have a lot to look at, but there's not a lot we need to really worry about. We're just going to focus on a few tabs here. We're going to go to stream. Now in stream settings, we're going to go ahead and pick our service, Glimesh, of course. And for server, you're going to want to pick physically what is the closest location to you. Now to me, that happens to be New York, North America. So I'll go ahead and select that. And then here's where you're going to want to paste your stream key. I already have it in there. We're good to go. And then right here where you see ignore streaming service setting recommendations, leave that unchecked. So what's that's gonna do is no matter what settings you plug in to OBS, if any of them are extraneous or kind of break the platform's limitations, the platform will communicate with OBS and basically bring it back down to normal, right? So if you're trying to stream at 7,000 bitrate by accident or even on purpose, and you have this unchecked, it's gonna take it down to 6,000 regardless of what you set it at, if it's higher. Now, once we have all that set up, we're gonna go into the output tab. Now for the output tab, you're gonna go, first of all, into output mode and make sure you select advanced. Advanced is going to give us a little bit extra access to some settings, as you can see here. We're going to have more access to the preset, the profile, how many B frames we're using, etc. So there's two options you can use when it comes to encoder for streaming. You can use either NVENC New or X264. So we're going to start with NVENC New. For NVENC New, you see here that I have rescale output checked and I have it downscaled to 1280 by 720. Now with this, you're only going to want to do this if you're streaming and recording at the same time. And you want to be able to record in full 1080p, 1440p, or 4K quality, but you also want to send out a stream that's not in that quality realm, you know, because you can't stream at 4K, but you can definitely record at 4K. So this is where you would rescale the stream if you want to record in the original. But for most people, if they're just streaming, right? Most people who are just streaming and not recording at the same time, you're going to want to rescale on the video tab. So we're going to go to the video tab. You're going to set the base canvas resolution to the resolution of the monitor you're capturing from. So my main monitor is a 1080p monitor. So I set it to 1920 by 1080p. Now the output scaled resolution, that's where you would change it to 720p if you're trying to stream at 720p or whatever resolution you want to stream at. The reason why you want to do it here and not in the output tab is because here you can select how we're going to downscale the image. Here you don't really have a control over that, and the downscale has been found to look poorly compared to using the video tab and selecting your own filter. Now in downscale filter, you're going to have three options. You're going to have linear, which uses I think like 8 samples. You're going to have bicubic, which you can see here, sharpen scaling, 16 samples, and you're gonna have Lanxos, which uses, I think, up to like 32 or 36 samples. As you can see, I can't click here because I'm recording at the same time, but I'm familiar with them. But you're not gonna wanna use what you feel is the best, the Lanxos. The reason why is because first, lots of people online have done lots of research, compared picture to picture, and they found out that bicubic basically looks the same as Lanxos. You cannot tell with the naked eye the difference. But Lanxos will use up more of your available bitrate than bicubic. Basically, like, it looks like twice as more, you know, if the math was scaled like that. And then common FPS values, this is where you set your FPS. Now we're gonna go back to the output tab. Now that we've decided what we're gonna stream at, you know, for me, I stream at 720p. So here I would have put 720p. But since I record and stream at the same time, I rescale here. Next, we're gonna go ahead and head over to the Glimesh Support page, right? I have it up here. And support at support.glimesh.tv. And we're gonna go to streamer resources. And let's see here. Stream settings. Great. Well, let's see what they recommend. All right, we're gonna take this and we're gonna piggyback off of this. Now, go back into OBS and we're gonna change our rate control to CBR. You don't want CQP, VBR, or lossless. That doesn't allow you to really control the bit rate you're set at. Now for bit rate, Glimesh, as you can see here, recommends you to stream at or below 6,000 kbps. Now I'm here to tell you, you should never stream at 6,000 kbps on Glimesh. Now for bitrate, Glimesh recommends a maximum of 6,000 kbps, kilobits per second. And I'm here to tell you, don't stream at 6,000. Because although you have the rate control set to CBR, OBS takes that as like a soft recommendation. It will take that 6,000 and be like, you know what? I'm gonna push it. This scene's kind of heavy. Let's go to 6,400. He won't notice. But Glimesh notices. And when you start going above 6,000 bit rate per second, some viewers will start experiencing hiccups, stutters, even freezes. And I started noticing that although most of the time my stream was coming through smoothly at 6,000, occasionally people are going like, oh, it froze, let me refresh. Oh, it's skipping, let me refresh. Oh, I only hear audio, the video stopped. Weird problems like that. So I was like, maybe it's on my end. After lots of troubleshooting, I brought it down to 5,600 kilobits per second, and that problem completely went away. Or almost completely. Occasionally, like once a week, it'll still happen. But I think that's more of like, you know, Glimesh is still coming up and they're still fine-tuning the FTL. Next, we're going to go to keyframe interval. For that, you just want to leave it at 2. Personally, I've tried 1. 1 uses a little bit more bitrate, and I didn't notice any change in quality for the games that I play. I play mostly shooters and fast-paced games, or games that have a lot going on graphically. So a lot of graphical changes. So I leave it at 2 because I want to really capture all those graphical changes as best as possible, instead of spend all the resources I have on adding in another keyframe every second. Now we're going to go to preset here. I have it set to max quality. Honestly, I'm going to go back down and set it to quality. There's no perceivable difference. All max quality does is cause your GPU to your encoder to do a second pass of the image to make sure, you know, everything's nice and spiffy. But what can happen as a result is you can get a lot of encoder overload, depending what gaming you're playing. And that can cause issues on its own. If you keep it at quality, you're really going to minimize or take away that encoder overload possibility. And profile, you always want to set it high. Basically, this one, my knowledge is kind of vague on this, but from what I understand, basically, when you set it to high, you're just telling the GPU, basically the encoder, like, hey, this is how I want you to go about encoding, with like this, I want you to encode at this standard. And that doesn't really mean you're going to be stressing your CPU more or anything. You're just setting parameters for it to encode within. Next, Glimesh recommends you turn off look ahead and cycle visual tuning, as we can see here. But I'm going to tell you half of that I would recommend. So we're going to go down into look ahead and cycle visual tuning. Now, as you can see on Glimesh's support page, they recommend you to disable both look ahead and cycle visual tuning. Now, look ahead uses dynamic B-frames, which we already are recommended to set to 0. So that's useless. So we're going to go ahead and have B-frames already set to 0, so we don't need look ahead. Now, cycle visual tuning, what it does is it basically takes, as you can see here, it says that it optimizes the use of bitrate for increased perceived visual quality, especially in situations with high motion at the cost of increased GPU utilization. Now, I keep this on because what it does is, let's say you have an image and the encoder left a little bit of blockiness in it, right? What cycle visual tuning does is it kind of smooths that blockiness and tries to make the image overall look as close as it can to the original, and just keeping it smooth. It will smooth out the blockiness, and perceivably, personally, it looks way better. It looks smoother, and it's worth it. It doesn't introduce any extra latency, and I'd highly recommend it. Next, GPU. This is just selecting your GPU to encode. You're going to want to leave it at 0, meaning it's going to use your primary GPU. B-frames, they recommend to set it to 0. We're going to set it to 0. So the reason why you might want to use X264 over NVENC is a couple reasons, actually. One, obviously, you might not have an NVIDIA GPU. So you're kind of forced to go with X264, which is a great encoder and is fine. So don't be too worried about that. Now we're going to go into rate control, and that's going to remain the same. You want it to set it to CBR because you want it to be kind of locked to that bitrate. And as we talked about before, even with CBR, it tends to fluctuate a little bit on heavy scenes. So same as NVENC, I set it to 5600. And during heavy scenes, at most, it'll jump up to 6000, which is why I chose 5600. Next, keyframe interval, you're going to want to set it to 2, same as before. Or you can set it to 1 if you want to play around with that setting. And CPU usage preset. Now, this is where I get into the other reason why you might want to use X264, is if your CPU can support medium. Even fast, but I usually say medium. Because medium is where you start to notice that X264 looks better than NVENC. Not that much noticeably better, but better. And so I have it set to medium because I have a Ryzen 7 3800X. When I stick it to medium at 720p 60 FPS, even in heavy games, it's using up to 30, at most 40% of my CPU just on OBS, which still leaves me plenty of room to game. And without losing a lot of frames. Now, profile, same as NVENC, you're going to want it to high. Now, an extra step you could go, right, is, first of all, they don't mention anything about tune. And you can just leave this at none and then go down here to X264 options, as they recommend here, and set your B-frames to 0. Now, how you would do that in OBS for X264 is you just type in right here, B-frames equals 0. Now, an extra step you could take is go ahead into tune and go down into 0 latency. Now, what does 0 latency tune do for you is it optimizes certain settings in your encoding pipeline to take a little bit less time, or certain settings that are not as important to be a little less thorough, so that way you can put out a frame as soon as it's done rendering. And with 0 latency on, I have gotten anywhere between a quarter of a second to less in delay to almost instant. So I highly recommend this if it doesn't introduce any issues. Now, sometimes certain CPUs, or sometimes I don't know how optimized the zero latency tune is with certain platforms. All I know is that when I streamed on Twitch and tried the zero latency tune, it did not work well. But when I stream on Glimesh and tried the zero latency tune, it works fine without hiccups. And it is incredible. Now, video, same thing. Output scaled resolution. Let's say you're streaming a 720p. You're going to want to put that setting here. And downscale filter, you're always going to want to go by cubic. Don't worry about Lanczos. Don't worry about linear. Always by cubic. It's going to give you a good image quality. Now, after all of this, you might be tempted to stream at 1080p 60 FPS. And I'm here to tell you, no, don't do it. 6000 bitrate is not even close to what you need to stream good quality 1080p 60 FPS. Now, the exception of that is slow paced games or click-through games where not a lot is changing on screen at a time. When there's not a lot of information change on screen, OBS doesn't really need that 6000 bitrate to display a 1080 image if most of the things in it are standing still and not really changing. But most of the time, if you're playing a game like a shooter or a game with a lot of dense foliage or where you're moving around and there's a lot of like pixel change happening, you're gonna want to go down in resolution. Because 720p 60 FPS at 6000 bitrate is going to look way better than 1080p at 60 FPS. Trust me on this one. For those games. If you're playing mostly still games, or you're a creator stream where you're just drawing, or maybe game developer, or some kind of artist where you're not move around, it's not a heavy scene heavy game, then 1080p 60 FPS will go perfectly for you. Now, next we're gonna go into advanced. Now these are settings that I would recommend you only touch if you're really comfortable. Now, for process priority, usually it's set to normal, but sometimes you can experience certain hiccups where it seems like Windows is not really recognizing an OBS as a program that needs to run simultaneously and deserves equal attention as your game. Now, in order to change that or help your computer recognize that OBS is important to you, you can set it a little higher. And to me, I found that setting it to above normal helps when in a situation where I might have dropped a frame or two due to encoding lag. Whereas there's no more lag, the Windows is prioritizing OBS, and as soon as OBS requests something, it's going, hey man, I got you. To put it in layman's terms. Now for video, in the video section, this is where I recommend most people do it. Doesn't matter if you're experienced or not. Trust me on this one. Renderer. I'm pretty sure there's only one option. You're going to leave it on Direct3D 11. Color format. This I learned from Twitch is that streaming with NV12 color format works. It works. Always works. All platforms support it usually. Just keep it at NV12. Now color space, you're going to want to set it to 709. 709, I believe, is the widest color space available in the options here. And even if it's not, it tends to be the more agreeable color space. From the research I've done, the color space that is generally known and accepted as the standard, right? For example, if you're streaming at full color range, somebody that's seeing you on a TV might get an overall darker picture or overall brighter picture in some areas than what you're seeing. And it can definitely ruin the experience, because you could take a game that's really dark in some areas like Escape from Tarkov, and if you set the color range to full, a lot of people are not going to be able to see the detail that you're looking at. So please set this to partial. Other than that, I feel these are the best settings for streaming smoothly on Glimesh, as I have found through my own research. And if you want to learn more about OBS, I would highly recommend going ahead and heading over to Epos Vox channel. This guy is literally an OBS guru. As you can see here, if you go down to playlists, he has, oh wow, he has a lot of playlists, but he has an OBS beginner's guide, and he also has an OBS master class. See, I can't find it here. Let's head over to his homepage. Yeah, OBS Studio Masterclass. Lots of videos that go in depth on OBS and how its settings interact with one another and the streaming platform that you're streaming on. Other than that, guys, that's all I have for today. I appreciate you guys watching this far, and let me know what you have found to be the best settings for streaming on Glimesh. As you can see, this is still an ongoing experiment for me. I'm always trying out different settings and seeing how they affect the viewer side of things and the streamer side of things. And I'm always fine-tuning, tweaking, as well as constantly going back to Epos Vox's channel and referencing his research. So if you want to know anything I talked about in greater detail, this guy covers it. But other than that, guys, please let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.